Today I want to talk a little bit about Node, in particular the Node Package Manager. Talking to a number of people that have been looking at Node, honestly don't understand what the Node Package Manager is doing for you and all the benefits that the tool has for you. So just to kind of start things off, I know a lot of us in here have used Ripple. I think pretty much everyone has. This Node Package Manager is everything I've ever wanted Ripple to be, just to be honest with you. So it is pretty killer in what it can do and an awesome tool to use. So real quick, what is an NPM package? All right, now there's an interesting workflow here. An NPM package is just a folder with a Package.json in its root and some stuff in it. All right, that's all it is. You can basically having that Package.json in there allows you to gzip the contents of that folder, push it up to some URL, doesn't matter where, register it with npmjs.org, so and that's a public registry that anyone can pull from, or you can send it to any registry you want. Doesn't have to be the public registry. You generally try to tie those to the name of the package and the version number. Those are the only two required configurations for the Package.json. And then whenever you publish a module to NPM, by default it gets a tag of latest. So if you just ask for an NPM module, you'll get the latest one, whichever that might be, unless you ask for a specific version. So then, lastly, that downloaded module that you pull down points back to step number 1, so you can recreate the whole loop. All right, which is really fantastic. So, although Node is primarily designed for Node modules, you can throw anything in it. Similar to NuGet, it's just a zip file. All right. So you can throw your CSS in there, you can throw images in there, you can even throw .NET binaries in there if you really wanted to, or even .NET source, whatever you want. As long as it's a file, you can throw it in there. It was primarily designed for Node though, so it does add some nice features to Node that you can utilize. So like I said, at the root of your repo, there is a package.json file that defines your module. All right, and the minimum requirements are the name and the version. That's all you really need to get off the ground and running. If you don't want to write that yourself, because it's so much text, you can go to the command line and do NPM Init, and it will do it for you. It'll try and do a little more than just those two, just to kind of give you some default settings in your Package.json. Just want to quickly look at that. So if we do npm init, it's just going to ask you a few things. First off, what do you want to call this thing? It's going to, by default, give you the name of the directory that you're currently in. But you can change it to whatever you want. If you just hit enter, it'll just take that. It'll start at version 0. Allow you to enter a description. If you don't enter one, it'll just put an empty string in your Package.json. So test description. Now this is useful mainly for when you publish to this module to NPM. This description will be right there, describing your module right there on their page. Like I said, this is made primarily for Node, and so they are going to assume that you're going to have an index.js file at the root of your project. You can point this anywhere. If I wanted to, I could say that I'm going to look at some lib index or lib main. Wherever you want your entry point to be, you can set your entry points where you're at. And that's important so that in other Node modules, you can reference this Node module by its name, and what will actually resolve is this entry point. All right. Node is very big on testing. A lot of the Node community is really big on testing, so they try to get you to put in how to test your code up front. We don't necessarily know what that's going to be yet, so let's leave it blank. Git repository, I haven't created one yet, so I'm going to go ahead and skip that for now. Any keywords, this makes it searchable on NPM when you publish it. Who you are. They ask that you put your email in there, just so people can get a hold of you since you're publishing something publicly. The default license that they choose for you is ISC. You can change it to MIT or Apache 2 or whatever you want. You can specify that there. And then it says, okay, this is what I'm going to generate for you. You want it, yes or no? Okay, take it. So now I have a package.json file. That is exactly what the command line said they were going to put in there for me. Not much. I've now defined a module that I can publish to NPM if I wanted to. So those same defaults are nice, but they work even better if you're doing this against an already initialized Git repository. All right. Remember that point where it said, hey, do you want to do this against, what repo is this going to be? Well, just to kind of demonstrate what that'll do for you. It'll put the repository in there, what kind of type it is, so you can use anything. It's usually the default, but you can use Maven, or what is it? Mercurial, that's the one I was thinking of. Right? But there's a couple other things that come in there that they'll track, especially if it's GitHub, they know how GitHub issues work, and they will do a bugs category for you and the link to the issues for your repo, as well as the home page. I think that's it. So the nice thing about those, you can go to any repo. Let's say I want to say npm. So right now I'm not even in the same directory as the repo for this package.json I have open up. But if I did docs gold-cjsx, I'm gonna go find it, and my wireless, it looks like, is trying to establish a secure connection, but it is opening up the Git repo in browser. Promise it is. See, there's the page it's trying to go to, but Wi-Fi is not working out for me right now. And what's nice is NPM will actually take that a step further, and let's say you want to go find, let's say you found a bug on that, you can just do bugs. I'll take you to the bug tracker for that. So if you're using something other than GitHub issues, you can if for example you exposed a public utrack or a public any issue tracker out there, you can put that URL there, and they'll get to it. Nice and easy. So you have nice command line tools. You don't have to go hit Google to find it or anything like that. Kind of just saves you time to go find stuff. And you can do that against any project. So I do request. Taken right there. So if you know a node module that you're using and they have specified where their home page is or where their bugs are, you can easily go get to them. Get to that really quick. So it's some useful help that you got from NPM. Another nice feature of the package.json files is the scripts section. So remember that section where it asks you what's your test command that you want to do. Well, that's part of the scripts. So they have a couple special scripts that if you just do npm install or npm update or any of these categorizations or any of these special ones, npm will go and execute that script for you. Now it doesn't have to be a script; it's just any kind of shell command that you can execute. All right. They all also come with with some pre and post hooks, so you can do a pre-test if you want to set up a server, and a post-test to tear that server down if you wanted to, and not have that be a concern of your test. By default, when you come into a project and you clone it for the first time, generally what you do is an npm install to get all of your dependencies brought down from the public registry. That install hook is there and will be called as part of that install and part of that download. So if any of your dependencies, for example, had some native code that needed to compile, there's the hook to trigger that compile. Likewise, the post install, if you needed to do some, okay, now we've got all the dependencies, let's do a little bit of cleanup on the repos and generated files and whatever you have that you want done. However, install scripts are generally considered an anti-pattern. The only reason you should ever be using these is if you are bringing in native code that needs to be compiled on the machine that's running it. That's the only time you should ever use that install script. So generally try to stay away from it. Like I just said. And even then, it's still considered an anti-pattern, and then what they try to say to do is use the .zip file, and Node knows how to go use that to go compile your native assets instead. I don't know the full details of that. I don't really use that feature that often. I actually never have. So. Now, if you're writing a package and you're using something, you need to have something that's done to this package in order for it to be used. Try to do it in your pre-publish hook. All right. So this is especially useful for things like writing a CoffeeScript. You don't want to make everyone who's dependent on your module also be dependent on CoffeeScript. So what you do is transpile all of your code from CoffeeScript to JavaScript and include that JavaScript in your published zipped up package. Now your downstream users don't have to take on that dependency on CoffeeScript. Here's an example of a post install. I'm going to be touching up on Napa a little bit. So Napa is an NPM module out there specifically targeted for getting you dependencies that are not on the public NPM registry and may or may not even have a package.json. All right. So your jQuery plugins, it's a perfect place for this. So for example, the jQuery mass plugin, there's no package.json. I think it's up on Bower, maybe, I don't know. I don't care. By bringing in this dependency and then saying, okay, after you've installed all dependencies, run the post install hook that runs the Napa command, and it knows to grab from the package.json, GitHub repositories by default. Just bring that down and shove it into my node modules directory. I'll get to the directory where everything comes down. So you don't have to go and muck with a bunch of stuff just to get. So like you don't have to bring on a dependency on Bower just to get something that's on GitHub. I meant to change install to start, but it's for that header. But if you had to run the command npm start, so if you wanted to have this package server by npm installing it and then running it, then that would be the hook to do that. So you could automate that whole process. That's what their goal is. Heroku uses this extensively for running your app on Heroku when you first publish or push up to them. You can also run any other script that you want. You don't have to be confined to the default scripts that they give you, but you don't have the pleasure of saying just npm whatever your script name is. Then you have to do npm run script, whatever your script name is. So here's an example of one that I use. It's called Coveralls. Coveralls is a open source and a paid solution for code cover statistics on your code. And so it's leveraging Istanbul, which is another NPM module, to run your tests that I've got with Mocha and run code cover statistics and shove it up to that website and keep track of it for me. So that's an example script that I can specify in here. And it's just a command line tool, so you can do all your and types, whatever you need to do. But why are these important? I mean, we've talked about Gulp, we've talked about Mimosa, some of you even started using them. But why do you need these hooks? Well, what these hooks do is that when you run them through NPM, it adds to your path environment variable, so you don't have to rely on some of these command line tools being installed globally to your system. They can be installed to your directory and still run them without needing to dive in and find out where the actual executable script is. So, final example, I demonstrated it with Napa, it's the same thing with this bar dependency. If I wanted to start, I don't want to have to install bar to my operating system just to get the command line tool to run it. And so you bring in the dependency, your start script will add the path necessary to find that bar executable and run it. So it's self-contained. The same holds for Gulp. If you wanted to run Gulp, normally the workflow for that is you install it globally, so you have the command line tool, and then you run it. That's just how you work in a dev mode, a dev environment. But on a CI server, you don't want to pollute all your operating system. In a production environment, you don't want to pollute the operating system. So it's a way to keep those things sanitized. So one of the things you can specify in a package.json is an executable script. And executable scripts defining your package.json when installed to your project reside in here, which is kind of difficult to add to your path. So it'll do that for you. They can be any type of executable. They don't have to be something that you bring down for Node. You can execute ls on the, or whatever you want, on the any shell command that you can think of. Now dependencies are node dependencies that are through the node module system that you bring down. They're no different than things like NuGet or Ruby gems. But dependency hell isn't as bad. So this is an example from .NET that killed us a lot. In particular, Log4net version 1.2.10 had a public signature or public signed key that they signed their code with. And for some reason, by the time 1.2.12 came around, they used a different public key for it and broke everything. So in .NET, if you bring in a dependency, it has to be the same version, or else it's not going to work. With Node, it will let some other module work with Log4net from 1.12 and let the rest of your app work from 1.2.10. Okay, it's pretty cool. So the way that they get away with this is when you install your modules, when you're running the code, you bring in the modules with a require call in JavaScript, and that the string that you pass into require, if it's not a native module, so if it is a module that's installed, or as long as it doesn't begin with a slash or dot slash or dot slash. So what will happen is Node will actually walk your directory structure trying to find this module. All right. So take this bar.js, for example. If I'm currently in my project and I ask if I require bar, it's not going to find it anywhere in my current directory, so it's going to tack on node modules in my current directory and then look for bar. Doesn't find it? Okay, walk up one directory, tack on node modules, look for bar. Same on all the way up to the root of your computer. So you can localize your dependencies to the earliest point that needs it. So which also allows you to have multiple versions present at the same time. So this is what your directory structure would look like for this Log4net example. Log4net doesn't exist in Node, by the way, for any of you that are curious. But this is how it would have worked in Node, right? If some other module needed it, it would try to find it and say, oh, I don't have it anywhere in this directory, so I'm going to tack on node modules, and whoop, there it is. Let's use it. All right. Likewise, your project would be like, I don't have it anywhere in here, so I'll tack on our node modules. Oh, there it is, and just use it. Okay. it's still dependency hell. No matter how much you try to sugarcoat it, it's still going to suck sometimes. So you better watch out what you're doing. All right, because now you just took the problem of having one version that was causing you problems versus now I've got multiple versions of the same library running around in my application. How do you know which one's working? Which one's actually at play when? So better be careful with this. So this especially becomes a problem with node modules that are supposed to be plugins for other node modules. All right. So my Gulp CGSX plugin is a plugin for Gulp. All right. So Gulp uses it, but I have a dependency on Gulp because of basically I require some of their core libraries that they have to function. Well, if my project has Gulp 387 and I wrote this thing against 360, well, what's going on? Right? Not ideal. So NPM has a concept called peer dependencies. If you define these, then what they say is, I expect to have the same version as whatever downstream is requiring me, is pulling me in. All right, so if my project brings in Gulp and Gulp CGSX, then Gulp CGSX has to be dependent on the same version as what you're requiring on with Gulp. This has caused a lot of people headaches. It can be tricky. You got to be careful about how you specify what version ranges you're going to allow in your plugin or in your peer dependency. If you run into that problem, just shoot me an email or come talk to me. I'll try and help you out. So now we've taken something where we've had the two different versions, the 387 and the 360 of Gulp. Now they're both being enforced to be 387. And Node is really good about detecting they've already got that version, so it's not going to go reinstall it. Remember, you've got that benefit of walking up the directory structure, looking for a dependency. So if it walks up the dependency structure and sees that you've already got it, it won't install it further down in your directory structure. So that's what your directory structure would end up looking like, somewhat flat inside of your node modules directory.
That's when you do an install, right? That's what it walks up.
Yeah, it's when you're installing when you come up to a fresh clone npm install, that node modules directory is created for you. That's the directory I'm talking about.
So let's say in your example, you hadn't, for some reason, you had a different dependency version in your root project as was required for your peer dependency in your other dependent project, like the Gulp CGSX project. What happens then? So let's say in my root I have 3.6 installed, but Gulp CGSX depends on 3.8 as a peer dependency.
Then npm would yell at you.
Okay.
In the command line, of course.
Yeah.
In bright yellow letters. It actually gives you a warning instead of an error. So it'll still let you do it, but it'll tell you you better be careful with what you're doing. So there's another set of dependencies. You have normal dependencies, peer dependencies, and now dev dependencies. These are important to note mainly for things like your testing, any of your build scripts, anything like that. The point being is that you don't necessarily need your downstream modules that are requiring you shouldn't necessarily need this to function. For example, Mocha as a test library, you don't want to impose that downstream projects have to use Mocha to test their stuff too. All right. So if you declare development dependencies and then you publish your package and somebody requires it, it won't even install the dev dependencies at all. Only if you're actually in the root of the repo and you say npm install will bring in the development dependencies. So all these dependencies can have multiple different versions. This is where Semver really comes in to really help. Who here has heard about Semver? Not a whole lot. So Semver is there's a website out there, semver.org. that define, which is kind of, it's a bunch of documentation on how to specify what the version of your application is. And interestingly enough, they've actually got their docs adhering to Semver. So as they've changed what Semver means, they've followed Semver to document itself. Interesting stuff. You should check out the website. It's pretty cool. So a version number, they state, should be 3 numbers. And these numbers are your major, your minor, and your patch. And they're important in what they say, what they mean. And Node really adheres to this. A lot of the community really pays attention to this. So you bump the major version up if you have incompatible API changes. So if you're going to break existing code by making a change, automatic bump of the major version. It's okay if that number climbs, but if it probably climbs to 99 or something like that, something huge, it's probably a sign that these guys probably don't know what they're doing. They're changing things a lot and breaking things a lot. Unless this code's been around for hundreds of years, and then, well, it just makes sense. But we're not there yet. Minor version is when you add new functionality but don't break existing functionality. Right? So that's an easy bump. And there's new stuff here, but it'll still work with the old tools. And a patch is if you find a bug that shouldn't have ever been introduced, doesn't break any backwards compatibility as far as the public API, then you can just do a patch release. You can also add other things for pre-release, beta, alpha testing, like alpha releases and whatnot. And NPM will also respect those as well. So if you were getting ready to release a 2.0 of something and you wanted to have people try it out, you can release it as a beta long before you actually release it as an actual 2.0 release. So in your Package.json, when you're declaring your dependencies, you can use some interesting version ranges. If you know that the library that you're following is adhering to Semver, this can be really nice. So you can either be specific and say, I want this version and no other version. Just give it that version and it'll adhere to that. Or you can say anything greater than, just give it to me. That one's kind of dangerous to do because you don't know if they're going to break the API, therefore break your code. Would not recommend that one. I don't know why you'd want to say anything less than. It seems weird as well, but you can do it. Greater than or equal to, same kind of dilemma. Or you can specify a version range. I want anything in that range. I'll be good with it. So you recognize that some of the API broke, but it doesn't affect you, so you're fine up to that version. Go ahead, bring it my way. This one's probably the one I use the most. I'm sorry, the caret's the one I use. The tilde is nice because you say, give me all bugs and patches, but don't give me any new functionality. I don't even want to know what that is. And the caret says, sure, give me the new functionality, but don't break my stuff. All right. So adhering to that really helps you out when you're working with node dependencies. There's a nice NPM command to just update everything, and it'll update everything within those version range specifiers. All right. So if a bug patch release was released, and you run an NPM update, you'll get it. Done. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to change any of your code. All right. And the NPM outdated command is pretty slick. So it will tell you everything that's out of date. And this will actually go hit the NPM library and tell you what there is. Now, interesting thing to note here is it's telling you the location. That's the dependency that you have. So that first one is your immediate dependency, and then the caret to the next one is that dependency's dependency. All right. So gulp source maps is how to release. It's how to patch update. The red color indicates that if I run an NPM update, I'll get that update. Yellow means I won't. Kind of off on the colors. I would have expected the inverse of that. Now, that can sure seem like a lot of information, and probably more than I care, especially since you can see a lot of that is dependencies of dependencies. So if you wanted to filter that down, you can just do only your immediate dependencies. So you let your dependencies deal with their dependencies, but my dependencies, I got 2 of them I need to update. All right. Good. Got everything. But if I looked at the depth, what's interesting, updating those immediate dependencies may have cleared out some of the other dependencies, or not so much, but whatever. Looks like string decoder pushed out a patch while I was doing that. Isn't that crazy? All right. So, oh yeah, I guess my phone is wired up with Google Hangouts. Sorry about that sound there in the background. All right, Napa. So I talked about this earlier, getting dependencies that are not on the public registry. Something to be careful of, because you are using a dependency to go get these dependencies, you want to make sure that when you release this module, it's probably a good idea to wrap those dependencies into your published module so that you don't make everyone be dependent on Napa and whatever this other dependency is. Because no NPM does not know what Napa means, right? So if you're going to do that, if you're going to release a public library of some sort and you have a Napa dependency, make sure your publish brings that in and publishes it. Have any questions about all that, everything I just talked about so far? All right. So getting ready to package and publish, what exactly ends up in your module? Well, the default is every single file in your project. That's less than ideal. They recognize if you're using Git, they'll respect your git ignore and not put anything in your git ignore into your package. However, if you're transpiling your CoffeeScript to JavaScript and you want that published, but you don't want that git ignored, that's where an NPM ignore comes in. You tell it to ignore your source folder, but include your compiled folder. So NPM ignore is above and beyond your git ignore. If you have one, it'll ignore the git ignore. But if you have nothing, it'll just include everything in the project. So this is where that pre-publish script is really important. You, once again, transpile your CoffeeScript to JavaScript and make sure you publish that, bundle it up in that zip file. Once again, Napa. I'm bringing this up 3 times now, so I really want to make sure to bring this point home. Don't make your downstream projects dependent on things that it can't know about very easily. If you can transpile something, do it. Now let's say you found a bug. It's a horrible bug. No one should ever use this package ever again, according to you. You can then send up a deprecation warning to the registry, and now anytime anyone tries to install an already released version of your module, it will yell at them saying, "Hey, you probably shouldn't use this because of this message, that arbitrary message, whatever it is." Right? So it's already released publicly. People are already depending on it for production. You give them a warning saying, "Don't do this," but you can still do it at your own risk. And let's say you found, oh, sorry, I did an error. Then you can undeprecate your deprecation with an empty message screen, and it won't be deprecated anymore. So you can save yourself some embarrassment sometimes. This one, after you publish something, you can unpublish it, which will delete it from the registry. But if people are depending on that, and you do that, it's quite an asshole move. So don't do that. Instead, it's like a force push you can get, yeah. And on the flip side, this can really suck. I created a module and I misspelled the name by 1 letter. I published it and I'm like, oh shoot, no one's using it yet. I unpublished it, pushed up the right name. Now they're both sitting up in the directory up there on. Even though you unpublished it, it's still there forever. They have no way to delete it. So Be careful what you're doing when you publish.
So what does the unpublished do?
So it actually does delete the zip file from the registry, but it doesn't delete the record that there was something at some point published with this version. And you will never be able to download. And that version is locked, and you can you can't redeploy to that version ever again. So if you did decide you wanted to publish, you now need to up your version so that people aren't getting bogged down by that.
Major version?
It depends what you're doing. If you try to push a patch, and the patch we were like, oh wait, whoops, it did something wrong, probably just need to upgrade your patch version. Be okay. I wouldn't go so far as to say you have to upgrade your major. I think this would be fine with a patch, depending on the change.
You can't publish something with the same name, the same version.
No. So you can never overwrite something that's already been published, even if it's been deleted.
So you unpublish it, want to publish it again.
You have the bug version.
Give it a
Mm-hmm. So development, one of the big things about Node is they really advise in the community, and they're really good about this, really small libraries that are really good at what they do. That's a lot of what Unix tries to advocate. So a lot of very sharp, powerful tools, just bring them on, but allow good ways to compose them together. Well, when you're developing, that kind of stinks. We've run into problems before where we have 5 projects that all participate into one production deploy. Right? Well, NPM has thought of that, and they have a link function that's just basically doing a symlink type scenario that brings everything together. We had it at some point with our old build gem that would allow us to do linking. I don't know if it's still there or if anyone uses it. It was a little harder to use. Let me go and show how to use that, though. So I've got React Router Bootstrap, which has a dependency on gulp CJSX, and I have a suspicion that there's a bug in gulp CJSX, so I want to test it with my React Router Bootstrap. All you do is go to the upstream project and run NPM Link. All that does is it sets up a symlink for this project to the global installation of your development machine for this project. Then you come over here and NPM Link, gulp CJSX. Now they're linked together on your machine. You didn't have to publish a version just to download it or anything like that. You are now using the exact same code. So if I look at my node modules folder, you'll notice gulp CJSX is a little bit different colors because it's a symlink to my actual repo that I've got locally. If you wanted to undo that, you can just unlink it. Then you have to reinstall. There's a 2-step process there. Because unlinking it will delete the symlink, but it won't re-download the dependency. So just bring it back down. Now it's not a symlink anymore. It's that's whatever was downloaded from NPM. So really easy to swap out.
I was just wondering, so I assume, like on a Unix environment, that just uses like ln-s.
Something to that effect, yeah.
How does that work in Windows? If you're doing that on Windows?
Symbolic links are functions. You can do something similar to them in Windows. It sucks, but you can do it.
Okay, so Node probably just figured it out.
I'm sure they did.
I'm just curious.
The example I gave that we had done it before in the old build gem was all Windows based. So
yeah, since Windows 7 they can do hard links. Soft links they've always been able to do because it's just a normal shortcut. Right?
Correct. Which, if it's a symlink, it participates in the node module discovery pattern just like anything else. So it works out pretty nice. A caveat to that to be careful of is remember when you publish a script, sometimes you have pre-publish tasks that are run, or that script that's run that will go and compile your copy script, for example. If you're linking in a module, you'll need to make sure you run that on your linked module as well because you're actually looking at the raw source, not a downloaded published version. All right, which is a fine example with Gulp CJSX, for example. All of my source, oh, never mind, it's JavaScript. If this source was CoffeeScript, I could probably be in for a bad time. Especially if my source is in a source folder and transpile to a lib folder and publish that way, then the downstream project would be expecting to find them in a lib folder. So you need to make sure you run your install scripts. Okay. There's also an enterprise version of NPM. It's still in beta, but they just barely announced it within the last month. This is awesome. So prior to now, there's just been a bunch of open source solutions for how to deal with standing up your own private NPM registry. They're finally coming up with something that will actually work, that they wrote, which I'm happy with. They have a better construct for what an internal module is and how to deploy it and to prevent it from being deployed to the public registry. You can have stricter security saying you can go through and whitelist modules that can be used or blacklist modules that can't be used. And then some companies have, I don't know if we do, some companies say that you have to host your code on premise, and this would satisfy that requirement. I don't know if we have that requirement or not. I doubt it. Interesting thing is, if you create a module on your internal private, it will communicate the name of that module to the public registry and prevent anybody from creating that same named module on the public registry, preventing you from having naming conflicts with something in the public sphere. Pretty nice. Works on the flip side too. It's a bidirectional thing, so they can't create something that you've already created with a name, and you can't create something that already exists with that same name. You can cache packages locally on premise, so iron ports being a bug and not letting NPM packages go through, and we can hit our internal cache before even hitting iron port, probably can have a better day, for example. Or if NPM.js for some reason is down, we already have it cached and we're not down. You can this is the killer feature right here, being able to privately scope your modules. So every dev would just have to run that first line up there to say, hey, I have an internal registry, here's where it is, and here's what its name is. Right? If everyone at least adhered to that scope name and that registry, then you can specify the name of your project or the name of your internal dependency with an @ whatever that scope is, / package name, and it will go pull that. It'll know that it comes from your internal registry instead of the public. And you do the same thing in your Package.json. When you give it that name, give it that scope name, saying it belongs to your internal registry, and it will prevent it from being deployed to the public registry. So nice, easy security by text. So easily overridable, but generally people wouldn't mess that up. So there's one thing I forgot to mention, and I was just thinking about it during the presentation. No, NPM does have another concept called Shrinkwrap. I forgot to put that in my slide deck. So I described this dependency structure to give you this tree that you can have multiple versions of things, and if you only specify the versions of your top level dependencies, how do you know what versions of your second, third, or fourth level generation dependencies are you going to get? Well, Shrinkwrap is a node command that will go through and walk that entire directory, that entire tree of dependencies, and now put that to a JSON file, and now you can be locked down to that version, similar to a bundler gem file lock. Right? So that's really nice, especially when you've got a CI server that went through and actually tested everything, made sure it was all good, got through all your integration tests, you got a releasable product, spit out your Shrinkwrap JSON because this is an application, and now you are forcing, when you deploy this application to a production server and you do an install scripts, it will force it to use the same version that was used during the build process. Not generally something you use when you're building a library, but when you're building a deployable application, that's important. All right, that was the last bit. Anyway, any questions on NPM or whatnot? There's a lot of content there. Yeah.
Your NPM ignore, does that take precedence over the get ignore if it's specified?
Yes, the NPM ignore does take precedence over the get ignore. If you have it NPM ignore, it won't even read your get ignore.
Okay.
No. So be careful with that.
Just to clarify your deprecation slide. There, this is going to sound a little weird. Deprecation is spelled incorrectly.
I'm not surprised.
Node spells it correctly. So in the
Okay.
case where you use deprecate, it's DEPRE.
Look at the NPM manual pages.
Sorry, I just.
No, that's fine. Thank you.
They do support a misspelling at the install though.
Do they?
Yeah, it isn't all. So it's
Amazing.
Yeah.
So,
Thanks for the catch on that, Steve. All right. Any other questions? All right.